Welcome to the deep dive. We are incredibly thrilled to have you with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We have a lot to get through.
We really do. But before we get started, I want to invite you to take just a second to pause. Just look around your immediate environment right now.
Right, take a physical audit.
Exactly. Look at the objects sitting on your desk. Or, glance at the apps on your phone's home screen.
Look at the clutter.
Yeah, think about the appointments cluttering your calendar, the media you consume this morning, and even the closely held beliefs you carry with you every single day.
That's a lot to process all at once.
It is, but I want to pose a question that might genuinely disrupt your routine a little bit today.
Let's hear it.
How much of what you do, consume, or believe is actually necessary?
That is a heavy question.
And I mean, truly fundamentally necessary for your existence.
When you take that question seriously, it has the power to completely reorient how you interact with your own life. I mean, it forces a kind of ruthless internal audit.
It really does. And that audit is the exact journey we're taking together today. We have a profoundly fascinating stack of texts to unpack.
Source material today is just incredible.
It's so good. The centerpiece is an excerpt from the brilliant, historically rebellious 18th century mind of Voltaire.
A truly disruptive thinker.
Oh, absolutely. Specifically, we're exploring his philosophical dictionary, the Dictionnaire Philosophique, and zooming in on his entry for the word nécessaire, or necessary.
And we're not just looking at Voltaire, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Alongside Voltaire, we are also going to dissect a meticulously curated list of ancient and historical proverbs.
We're all over the map.
Yeah, Greek, Latin American, French, and English traditions. And they're all orbiting this same elusive theme.
The range of voices in that proverb collection is staggering. You have ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates and Pythagoras.
Roman statesmen, too.
Exactly. All the way up to Enlightenment figures like Benjamin Franklin and Jonathan Swift. They are all wrestling across centuries to pin down this concept of what we actually need versus what we simply want.
And alongside that, we have this brief but incredibly powerful text titled Quranic Guidance and the Nature of Spiritual Necessity.
It's quite the pairing.
It is. So our mission today is to explore these deep layers of human needs, helping you rethink your own priorities, examine how you receive new ideas, and maybe even change how you view the structures of the world around you.
Picture it moving from the dusty, leather-bound shelves of an ancient Enlightenment library
Okay, I see it.
to this vast, open, starry night sky. Because that is the scale we are dealing with today. We are zooming all the way in on the microscopic realities of the human condition and then panning all the way out to the cosmos.
And I want to be very upfront about our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just reading old texts for a history lesson.
No, not at all.
We are using these historical documents to ask massive, intensely modern questions.
We are putting the emphasis entirely on what is necessary.
Yes. And by doing so, we are questioning the path we shall take as a society. We're asking, what world do we actually want to build?
Where must our focus and our priorities lie right now?
How do we receive new ideas? How do we observe the world with a new lens for our minds to expand?
It is a vital framework. Because by looking backward at how past civilizations defined necessity, we can critically examine our current trajectory.
Right.
We need to be mindful of the nuances and highly critical of our own assumptions. Yet we have to remain open to reaching new horizons for the salvation of our species.
Because if our foundation is just cluttered with the superfluous, we cannot build a resilient future.
We'll just collapse under the weight of our own bloat.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive right into the core of Voltaire's text on Nécessaire.
The dialogue format he uses is so effective.
It really is. He structures this not as an essay, but as a conversation between two characters, Osman and Selim.
Osman is the one who kicks things off.
Yeah, Osman starts with a massive, almost cosmological question about the nature of existence. He essentially asks Selim if absolutely everything in the universe is necessary.
It's a huge swing right out of the gate.
It is. How does Selim even begin to tackle a question of that magnitude?
Well, Selim takes a surprisingly definitive stance. He suspects that, yes, everything is necessary.
Really, everything?
Everything. His underlying logic is tied to the concept of a divine creator or a grand architect of the universe. Selim argues that if everything were not necessary, it would imply that God created useless things.
Wow. He does admit that there are scholars and thinkers who disagree with him, though.
Yes, he does. He expresses a fear of disputing it too aggressively. There is a layer of intellectual humility there.
Which is refreshing.
But what's fascinating here is that the core assertion is wild to think about. It frames the entire universe as a machine of pure, unadulterated efficiency.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Pure efficiency.
In Salim's worldview, the universe doesn't have junk code. It doesn't have leftover rattling parts that serve no function.
Every single piece matters.
Everything, from a grain of sand to a complex human emotion, has a designated purpose in the grand machinery.
If we think about that in modern terms, it's like coding a complex software program.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't write thousands of lines of code that execute zero functions just for the fun of it.
Because that just creates bloatware. It slows the whole system down.
Right. Or if you're building a skyscraper, you don't install massive structural support beams that aren't carrying any weight.
Salim is basically arguing that the architect of reality doesn't do bloatware.
That immediately reframes the human endeavor, doesn't it?
Completely. If the baseline of reality is pure necessity, then our modern tendency toward endless excess is suddenly at odds with the very fabric of the universe.
It means we are fundamentally out of sync.
We are introducing inefficiencies into a perfect machine.
But Voltaire doesn't let us float in the cosmological clouds for long, does he?
No, he pulls us right back down to earth.
Osman quickly pivots the conversation away from grand divine creation down to the messy, grounded reality of daily survival.
Osman is a highly pragmatic character. He essentially says, I want to talk about another kind of necessary.
He shifts the focus to what is required for the honest person simply to live.
And the misery that ensues when those basic necessities are lacking.
And here, Osman introduces a crucial realization. He points out that necessity on a human experiential level is entirely relative.
The examples the text provides to illustrate this are just fantastic.
Walk us through some of those.
Well, Osman points out that an Indian needs rice to survive, while an English person needs meat.
Right. Geography dictates the diet.
Exactly. A Russian requires heavy fur to endure the freezing climate, whereas an African needs only a light gauze fabric.
So biological necessity is tied directly to the environment.
Yes, but then he moves beyond geography into the spectrum of personal luxury.
What is the example he uses there? I think is brilliant.
He talks about transportation and status. He observes that one man believes a carriage pulled by 12 horses is an absolute non-negotiable necessity for his life.
12 horses.
Meanwhile, another man feels he only needs a good pair of shoes, and yet another man walks happily barefoot.
I love that progression.
The 12-horse carriage is purely psychological.
It feels incredibly relevant today. It makes you stop and wonder, what is the modern equivalent of the 12-horse carriage?
Oh, it could be any number of things. The latest smartphone upgrade every single year.
Yeah, a hyper-specific status symbol car.
Or even the sheer square footage of a suburban house. We internalize these cultural markers of success and convince ourselves we need them to function in society.
We confuse the cultural mandate with biological reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this forces us to examine our priorities. The critical insight here is that human needs are highly malleable and frequently dictated by environment, habit, and social expectation.
I'll admit, my own modern carriage is probably my ridiculously elaborate morning coffee setup.
We all have one.
Society, or maybe just clever marketing, has convinced me that I absolutely need a machine with 9 different pressure settings just to start my day.
It's the illusion of need.
But bringing this back to you, the listener, do a mental audit of your life right now.
This is where the work begins.
How much of your daily stress, your financial burden, or your baseline anxiety comes from maintaining your version of a 12-horse carriage?
Probably a lot more than you think.
How much energy are you burning to uphold things that society tells you are necessary, when in reality, you just need shoes? Or maybe you could even walk happily barefoot.
Separating the truly necessary from the culturally mandated superfluous is a deeply liberating exercise.
But it's also terrifying.
It is, because it strips away a lot of our comforting illusions.
Voltaire moves from undeniable biological and geographical necessities, like needing fur, to not freeze to death in Russia, straight into purely psychological and cultural illusions of necessity. The items we categorize as necessities might be viewed by someone in a different circumstance or even just a different neighborhood as an unimaginable luxury.
But Salim provides this really profound philosophical counterweight to all that relativity.
He pushes back.
He does. He argues that beneath the rice, the meat, the heavy furs, and those carriage horses, there is an unchangeable biological baseline.
The hardware.
Exactly. God, or nature, gave humans a universal biological hardware to function.
He asserts that the Creator gave the human species everything it universally needed to function as a unified entity. It is a profoundly grounded, almost clinical view of the human animal.
We are universally equipped with eyes to see, feet to walk, a stomach to digest, and a brain to reason.
Eyes to see, feet to walk, a mouth to eat, an esophagus to swallow, a stomach to digest, a brain to reason, and organs to reproduce our kind.
It's fascinating that he places a brain to reason right in the middle of a list of digestive and sensory organs.
I noticed that too. He doesn't isolate it.
He isn't framing reason as some elevated, ethereal luxury or a divine spark completely separate from the body.
He is categorizing the ability to reason as a fundamental biological survival tool. It's no different from having a stomach to process food.
That framing is essential to Enlightenment thinking. Reason is our primary survival mechanism.
So the software varies.
Precisely. The software are cultural preferences, our dietary habits, our environmental adaptations that might vary wildly across the globe, but the underlying hardware is fundamentally universal.
But how does Salim account for the exceptions? Because Osman pushes back on this universal hardware theory with a very practical challenge.
He brings up a good point.
He challenges Salim by asking, what about the people who are born deprived of some of these supposedly necessary things?
Salim's view on this is deeply pragmatic. It really reflects the scientific curiosity of the Enlightenment period.
So,
Well, he explains that the general laws of nature govern the universe, and within those massive, sweeping systems, accidents occur. This is where the text gets into some 18th century terminology that we really need to contextualize for a modern audience.
yes, please do.
Salim answers by acknowledging that the general laws of nature sometimes produce accidents. He uses the term monsters to describe these anomalies.
That sounds incredibly harsh to modern ears.
It does, but to be absolutely clear, in Voltaire's time, monster was a scientific and philosophical term used to describe physical birth defects or severe anomalies. It was not a moral judgment.
Right, it was a clinical language of the era for a deviation from the biological norm.
Exactly. Salim's defense is that while these tragic accidents occur due to the friction of natural laws, generally speaking, the human being is fully equipped with what is needed to live in society.
He is leaning heavily on the concept of the general rule over the exception.
We have to unpack that tension between the blueprint and the execution. The text frankly acknowledges that nature isn't flawless. Accidents happen. Biology just isn't flawless in its execution every single time.
The friction of the system.
Exactly.
Does this weaken Salim's argument, or does it say something else about human resilience?
I would argue it strengthens it by grounding it in reality.
So the exceptions don't break the rule.
Right. The individual exceptions brought about by natural laws, they don't disprove the overarching rule of our collective biological design. Voltaire refuses to paint a utopian picture of flawless divine creation.
He admits the system has glitches.
By acknowledging physical anomalies, he maintains that the overarching design of the species is incredibly robust. As a whole collective, humanity possesses the necessary tools to build and sustain society, even if individual components sometimes fail.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because surviving the elements is one thing, but living together in a society requires a completely different set of tools.
A different kind of necessity.
Yeah, the conversation in the text shifts from the physical hardware of the human body to the invisible societal necessities.
Osman asks if there are common notions, universal moral values, that all humans must share to make civilization possible.
Tying this directly to our focus on questioning the path we shall take, this highlights the inherent resilience of our species.
Yes, we must be mindful of the nuances.
We must build societies that use our collective resources to care for those impacted by the accidents of nature. But fundamentally, we are armed with this universal toolkit.
We possess that brain to reason.
The massive question we have to ask ourselves today is, how are we deploying that reason?
Are we using it to observe the world with a new lens and reach new horizons?
Or are we just using it to invent more complex 12-horse carriages?
That is the pivotal question of our era. And Salim's argument evolves beautifully in the text right at this point. He doesn't stop at physical biology.
He takes it a step further.
He argues that this universal toolkit extends into the immaterial. He claims there is a universal moral toolkit as well.
This is where the deep dive gets incredibly profound. Osman asks if there are common notions, shared ideas, or principles that allow all people, regardless of their culture, to live in society.
What is Salim's response?
Salim answers with an emphatic yes. He bases this on his wordly observations.
The text notes he traveled extensively with Paul Lucas, right?
Yes, our real historical French merchant and traveler. Salim claims that beneath the dizzying variety of cultural habits, diets, and clothing, he uncovered a universal moral bedrock.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This list is so crucial, it feels like a foundational blueprint for a functioning humanity.
Salim says that everywhere he traveled, he observed that people respected their father and mother.
Okay, that's one.
They believed they were obliged to keep their promises. They possessed pity for oppressed innocents.
Pity for the oppressed, yes.
They actively detested persecution. And finally, they looked upon freedom of thought as a natural right, viewing the enemies of that freedom as the enemies of mankind.
No matter where he went in the world, across different cultures and completely different continents, he found a specific set of shared, non-negotiable values.
The core tenets.
Right. You must respect your parents. You have an absolute obligation to keep your promises. And you must have pity for oppressed, innocent people. We need to analyze this list deeply because it is incredibly dense and speaks directly to the world we want to build. Voltaire is attempting to define the absolute minimum moral requirements for a just surviving society.
Let's pull them apart one by one. Respecting parents. That seems rooted in generational continuity, honoring our origins and the transfer of knowledge.
It's about maintaining the chain of human experience.
But keeping promises, that feels like the absolute bedrock of the social contract.
It is the foundational glue. If promises, contracts, and an individual's word mean nothing, then trust evaporates instantly.
And without trust,
cooperation is impossible. Society violently collapses into isolation and paranoia. It is a functional necessity, not just a nice idea.
Then he pairs having pity for oppressed innocents with the active detestation of persecution.
This pairing is brilliant.
Why is it important that he includes both the feeling of pity and the action of detesting?
Because pity alone can be passive. You can feel sorry for someone while watching them suffer and do absolutely nothing to stop it.
You can just observe the tragedy.
Exactly. Detesting persecution requires a rejection of the unjust system itself. It is the mechanism of justice. A society that lacks pity will inevitably consume its most vulnerable members, tearing itself apart from the inside.
And then we reach the crown jewel of Voltaire's moral necessities, viewing freedom of thought as a right of nature.
If we are asking how to ensure the salvation of our species, isn't this the ultimate answer, key?
It has to be. Freedom of thought is the only mechanism by which we can receive new ideas.
It is how we expand our minds. If a society crushes free thought, it crushes its own ability to adapt and survive.
Framing freedom of thought as a fundamental biological level necessity for a functioning society is a massive claim.
It really is.
And Salim doesn't just treat these values as polite cultural suggestions. He takes a remarkably intense stance on what it actually means to lack them.
He draws a very harsh line here. Salim argues that anyone who lacks these fundamental moral traits, someone who casually breaks promises, delights in persecution, or actively opposes freedom of thought, they aren't just expressing a different cultural viewpoint.
He uses some strong words.
He literally calls them badly organized creatures.
Wow.
He compares them directly to beings born without hands or eyes. To Salim, lacking a moral compass is the exact equivalent of lacking a vital physical organ. Society simply cannot function if its members are missing these invisible organs of empathy and reason.
It's such a striking comparison, and it leaves us with a really tough question regarding our own foundational values. For you listening, when you are navigating life, filtering new ideas, deciding what kind of community you want to build around yourself, are these your non-negotiables?
It changes how you look at people.
Totally. Viewing empathy, promise-keeping, and freedom of thought not just as high-minded ideals, but as absolute structural necessities for the survival of the species. It completely changes how you observe the people around you.
It demands that we audit our communities. If a society doesn't require these traits from its leaders and its citizens, Salim would argue it isn't a society at all. It's just a collection of badly organized creatures waiting to fall apart.
Voltaire's language regarding this is astonishingly aggressive.
He explicitly links this back to our earlier conversation about biology.
Yes, he says a person devoid of these morals is like a physical monster born without eyes or hands.
I want to pause and really chew on that concept. He is equating a lack of morality to a biological deformity.
How does viewing a lack of empathy or a desire to persecute as a biological failure change how we might structure our world today?
Modern society usually treats moral failings as psychological issues, or products of trauma, or just alternative political viewpoints.
We give them platform.
Exactly. But this completely revolutionizes our approach to justice and social structure. If we view cruelty, the systemic breaking of promises, and the suppression of ideas not merely as bad policy choices, but as actual deformities of the human spirit, akin to a missing limb, we can no longer tolerate them as valid alternative perspectives in the marketplace of ideas.
We would have to treat a tyrannical ideology the way a doctor treats a debilitating disease.
As an existential threat to the organism that must be contained or cured.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. It means we have to protect the freedom of thought as fiercely and instinctively as we would protect our own physical eyes from being blinded. Now, as we look at these next two sources and transition into the spiritual side of this debate, I want to be really clear with you. Our goal today is to act entirely as impartial observers.
Yes, very important point.
We aren't here to endorse Voltaire's specific critiques. And we aren't endorsing any particular religious theology or political view. We are just impartially reporting on the content provided to analyze how these differing historical texts attempt to answer the exact same question regarding what the human soul actually needs.
The philosophical tension between these texts requires us to look at them objectively, because they are presenting two entirely different frameworks for spiritual survival.
Exactly.
Osman, as always, takes this profound insight and tests its limits.
He pushes the boundary.
He takes this logic that only these core universal moral principles are truly necessary and applies it directly to the concept of belief systems and religion.
Right. Osman essentially traps Salim with his own logic.
It's a great rhetorical trap.
He says, well, if only truly universal things are necessary for human survival and society, then a newly introduced belief system, a localized dogma, simply cannot be necessary to the human species.
And he uses a highly specific historical and religious example from the text to make his point.
So in Voltaire's text, Osman asks if specific religious beliefs are necessary for humanity in all times and places. And they use Islam and the Prophet Muhammad as the specific historical example for their thought experiment.
And Salim argues that specific sects or dogmas are not strictly necessary.
Osman points out that humanity lived very well in society and fulfilled its perceived duties to God long before anyone believed that Muhammad had frequent conversations with the angel Gabriel.
Yes, and I think it's crucially important for us to navigate this section of the text with a clear understanding of what Voltaire is actually doing here.
Absolutely. We need a disclaimer here. It's a highly provocative example, and we should definitely caveat this.
We have to be very clear.
For anyone listening, we are strictly unpacking Voltaire's philosophical mechanics regarding the nature of dogma and necessity. We are not taking sides or endorsing his specific critiques of Islam or any organized religion. Our goal is impartially to analyze the Enlightenment logic he is deploying.
And that logic is fascinating. Salim agrees completely with Osman's premise.
He doesn't fight him on it at all.
Salim says it is glaringly obvious. It would be ridiculous to think humanity was entirely incapable of fulfilling its duties or building societies before Muhammad was born.
Salim argues that the world ran just fine before Muhammad, just as it runs today.
His central philosophical argument boils down to this. If the belief in the Al-Quran, the Quran, or any specific religious dogma for that matter, were truly fundamentally necessary for the human species, God would have made it exist from the very beginning of the world.
It would be retroactive to the dawn of time.
It would exist in all places simultaneously, and God would have given everyone the innate intelligence to see its truth, just as universally as he gave us eyes to see the sun.
It is the ultimate test of universality. Because these specific religious sects and dogmas are not universal across time and space, Salim categorizes them differently.
He demotes them.
He compares them to changing fashions, to the shifting opinions of physicists that constantly succeed one another, and crucially, to positive laws.
Oh, wait. Before we move on, you used the term positive laws. For those of us not steeped in 18th century legal philosophy, what exactly does he mean by that?
Specifically in contrast to a universal or natural law.
Yeah, what's the difference?
It's a vital distinction. Natural law refers to universal rights and wrongs that are inherent to human existence, like Voltaire's idea that persecution is bad.
Unlike the unchangeable natural laws of biology. They are constructed by humans.
Yeah.
They change like fashions or like the shifting opinions of scientists over the centuries. There are cultural structures that rise, adapt, and eventually fall, depending entirely on the era and the geography.
Positive law refers to human-made laws that are posited or laid down by a specific government or society at a specific time.
Give me an example.
For example, a speed limit is a positive law. It changes depending on what country you are in. By comparing religious sects to positive laws, Salim is saying dogma is a localized human construct, not a universal divine baseline.
So returning to Voltaire's text, Salim calls the Alcoran ridiculous, though he does admit it contains some good things, but his absolute, unshakable conclusion is that it is not necessary.
And again, we are reporting Voltaire's historical words here to understand his underlying point. And that brings us to the fascinating contrast provided by our second source, the text on Quranic guidance.
Which takes a very different angle.
It does. This text explicitly asserts that there is no compulsion in Islam. And it actually agrees with Salim's premise that a basic sense of spirituality is entirely natural and universal to all humans.
But it rejects the fashion comparison.
Completely. It completely rejects the idea that the Quran is merely a changing fashion. Instead, it frames the text as a specific prescription.
Prescription, that's the key word.
Yeah. It is described as a strict necessity that provided essential life-saving guidelines to a people who desperately needed that exact guidance at a specific time in history.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the synthesis of these two sources is truly profound. Both texts actually agree on a major foundational premise, that a baseline natural spirituality is inherent to the human condition.
They start from the same place.
They do, but where they diverge beautifully is on the role of specific religious texts. Voltaire's character sees them as historical variations, changing like the clothes we wear to suit the weather. The Quranic source views the specific text as a targeted, medical-like intervention, a prescription necessary for the spiritual survival and fulfillment of a people in their specific historical context, meant to cure a specific societal ailment.
It is the difference between seeing a map as just one of many interesting ways to view the landscape versus seeing it as the exact set of directions you desperately needed to avoid walking off a cliff at that specific moment in your journey.
That's a great way to put it. The underlying philosophical point is incredibly powerful when we apply it to our modern quest for clarity and mind expansion.
How so?
Dogma, by its very definition, is localized in time and space. Therefore, logically, it cannot be a universal human necessity.
If we tie this heavily back to our episode focus, how do we receive new ideas? How do we observe the world with a new lens?
We absolutely must be critical.
We have to violently separate the truly universal moral truths like detesting persecution and keeping promises from localized cultural fashions, political dogmas, and the ideological echo chambers of our current era.
Because if we treat a local dogma as a universal necessity, we become intellectually rigid. We start expanding our minds.
You get stuck.
Critical openness requires us to recognize dogma for what it is. A human construct that might have some utility, might have some good things in it, as Salim notes, but is absolutely not the bedrock of our survival.
Okay, if we accept that dogma is just a changing fashion, and a lot of what we think we need is just a 12-horse carriage, that leaves a massive gaping hole in Salim's original argument.
What's the hole?
If the universe is a machine of pure efficiency, why would a perfectly efficient architect allow all these fake necessities, errors, and calamities to exist in the first place? Does Voltaire actually have an answer for that?
Osman zeroes in on that exact contradiction. He asks Salim, but since it exists, did God permit it? We are entering the philosophical territory of theodicy here.
Theodicy. Break that down for us quickly.
Theodicy is the theological and philosophical attempt to answer the problem of evil. It is the attempt to justify or defend the goodness and omnipotence of God in a world that is clearly full of profound suffering, evil, and error.
Osman is demanding a theodicy from Salim.
And Salim's answer is a crucial distinction. He says, yes, God permitted it.
He allowed it to happen.
Just like he permits the world to be filled with folly, errors, and calamities. But he introduces a sharp division between permission and design.
The source gives a very visceral, violent example to illustrate this.
It does. Salim says God permits that some men are eaten by snakes.
Yikes.
However, he argues forcefully that you cannot say God made man to be eaten by snakes.
He is separating the existence of a tragedy from the inherent purpose of human existence.
But Osman pushes back hard.
He says, wait a minute, doing a crime is disobeying God. God can't disobey himself. So if God made man in a way that man is capable of committing so many crimes, where does this capacity come from?
Why are we built to be capable of so much error and calamity?
And here is where Salim provides one of the most refreshing, unexpected answers in all of philosophical literature.
Faced with the ultimate unanswerable question of human suffering and divine intent, he admits total, unvarnished ignorance.
He says, "There are people who know, but it is not me."
I absolutely love that. I love Salim's intellectual honesty in this moment.
We live in a world absolutely saturated with pundits, politicians, and self-proclaimed gurus who claim to know the exact mind of the universe.
People who claim to have an answer for every single tragedy.
It is incredibly powerful and frankly necessary to just look at a complex problem and say, "I don't know."
This raises an important question for us about our own agency.
How does admitting ignorance give us agency?
If the universe, or the general laws of nature, merely permits calamities, follies, errors, and crimes to exist alongside us, but doesn't mandate them, what is our role?
Right. We aren't forced into them.
We cannot simply throw our hands up in defeat and say, well, the universe permitted this terrible thing, so I guess this is just how it has to be.
Yes, and let's go back to that snake metaphor because it is perfect.
The existence of a deadly threat? The snake is permitted by nature.
But that doesn't mean humanity must passively surrender to being eaten. We are not designed to be snake food.
Remember the universal toolkit.
We were given that brain to reason. So we use our reason to build a shelter.
We invent anti-venom.
We learn how to avoid the snake's habitat altogether.
If we align this heavily with our focus on building a new world, we cannot passively accept the destructive path we are currently on, whether we are talking about unchecked environmental degradation, hyperpolarization, or systemic injustice, just because the universe permits human folly to exist.
It's up to us to build the structures that protect us.
We must take rigorous, unyielding responsibility for our priorities. The presence of evil or error in the world is not an excuse for inaction. It is the exact reason action is necessary.
But Osman is getting deeply frustrated with this philosophical journey. He turns to Salim and complains, essentially saying, "I thought you would instruct me, and you teach me nothing."
He feels like he's just having his illusions shattered without being handed any new, grand, comforting truths to replace them.
Osman uses a great comparison. He says it's like a doctor showing him all the poisonous plants in the forest, but refusing to show him a single healing one.
Salim's response to this is essentially his final, distilled recipe for living in a confusing world.
He tells Osman, "I am not a doctor, and you are not sick."
But he offers a prescription anyway.
He gives Osman 4 pillars to live by, he says. Distrust all the inventions of charlatans, adore God, be an honest man, and believe that 2 and 2 make 4.
That is a remarkable, punchy distillation of Enlightenment philosophy.
It strips away all the cosmological bloatware and leaves you with the bare minimum requirements for a grounded life.
So what does this all mean? How do we unpack these 4 pillars for the modern mind?
Distrusting charlatans, adoring God, or if you prefer a secular interpretation, maintaining a reverence for the grand mystery of the universe,
Being an honest man.
and trusting basic math. 2 and 2 make 4.
What stands out to me profoundly is the immense value Salim places on simply knowing what is false.
When Osman complains about not learning shiny new truths, Salim asks him a vital question.
He asks, isn't it a great deal to know the people who deceive you and the gross and dangerous errors they peddle to you?
I think about our current era of total, unrelenting information overload.
We are drowning in deepfakes, algorithmic manipulation, fake news, and constant ideological spin.
In an environment like this, having a highly tuned critical lens to filter out charlatans might actually be the single most vital survival skill for the salvation of our species.
Truly, we are desperate for the healing plans. We want the grand solutions, the utopian visions, the 10-step programs to fix absolutely everything.
But Salim is issuing a stark warning. Before you can ever hope to find the cure, you must rigorously and accurately identify the poison.
And his final point, believing that 2 and 2 make 4, represents an anchor.
In a world swirling with subjective truths, relativistic dogma, and alternative facts, you must stay fiercely grounded in objective, demonstrable reality.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, again.
Go ahead.
How often do we actively seek out complex guru-level truths? We buy the dense books, we go to the expensive seminars, we scroll endlessly looking for some secret, esoteric knowledge to fix our personal lives or fix the world.
When in reality, we might just need to stick to the absolute basics of intellectual minimalism.
Ask yourself, are you being fundamentally honest? Are you actively recognizing and rejecting the scams and the charlatans in your daily media diet?
Are you trusting basic logic and evidence? The 2 plus 2 equals 4 over emotionally manipulative rhetoric designed just to make you angry.
Intellectual minimalism is a great way to phrase it. Strip away the superfluous noise, reject the dogmatic bloatware, and hold tightly to the verifiable necessities.
And speaking of minimalism and the concept of the superfluous, that transitions us beautifully to the massive second half of our source material today.
We are shifting gears from Voltaire's dialogue.
Yes, into a sprawling, curated collection of global proverbs, specifically dealing with necessity and the superfluous.
This is the wisdom of the ages, condensed into single, potent sentences.
What makes this list so fascinating to analyze is that it doesn't present a single, unified, neatly packaged view.
It actually offers a fierce debate across centuries, continents, and cultures about what it means to be human.
Let's dive deep into the first major theme we see emerging from these proverbs: the battle between strict minimalism and the desire for excess.
We kick things off with a Greek proverb from Socrates, dating back to the 5th century BC, as cited by Diogenes Laertius.
Socrates states, "He who can do without the superfluous is closest to the gods."
This represents a classic, hardcore ascetic view.
Explain that ascetic view.
In this philosophy, true divinity, or true human enlightenment, is found in the negation of desire. It is the belief that needing absolutely nothing beyond bare biological survival makes you spiritually superior.
Then we get a Latin proverb from Cato the Censor in the 2nd century BC, cited by Seneca, that takes us even further.
Cato says, "Buy not what is useful, but what is necessary."
That is intense. He is saying that even if a tool or an object is genuinely useful to your life, if you don't strictly, desperately need it to survive, you shouldn't acquire it.
And Benjamin Franklin carries that exact same austere energy into the 18th century American context in Poor Richard's Almanac.
He warns his readers, if you buy the superfluous, you will soon sell the necessary.
It is a stark, highly pragmatic financial and moral warning against the dangers of excess.
So we have this very strong, centuries-long lineage of strict minimalism.
But then the source text provides a brilliant, totally contrarian counterpoint.
We get Voltaire himself stepping out of his dictionary and into a quote from his 1736 poem, Le Mondain.
Voltaire writes, "The superfluous, a very necessary thing."
I love that this was included in the source stack. It totally upends the grim asceticism of Socrates, Cato, and Franklin.
Voltaire completely flips the script on Socrates and Franklin. He is arguing that while basic physical necessity, the rice, the meat, the heavy fur, keeps our biological hardware alive, it is the superfluous that actually makes life worth living.
The art and music.
Exactly. Art, luxury, complex cuisine, beautiful architecture, poetry, music. None of these things are biologically necessary to keep a human heart beating. Yet, Voltaire argues they are precisely what elevate human existence from mere animalistic survival into a thriving civilization.
It creates a fascinating tension for anyone trying to figure out how to live a good life. How do you balance Ben Franklin's strict code, the fear that buying that extra coffee or that piece of art or taking that vacation is going to eventually cost you your stability, with Voltaire's philosophy?
It's the ultimate balancing act.
Voltaire implies that the little luxuries, the things you don't technically need to survive, are actually the vital nutrients that keep your soul alive.
It's a tension that entirely dictates modern consumerism. We have to constantly weigh the security of the necessary against the joy of the superfluous, deciding which one we are actually prioritizing when we spend our time and our resources. Voltaire was historically known for thoroughly enjoying luxury.
He loved the theater, fine food, beautiful art, and comfortable living.
He is playfully but seriously arguing that the human experience is not just about bare biological survival.
Let's play devil's advocate and really debate this for a minute.
Let's do it.
Socrates and Franklin are telling us to strip absolutely everything away to reach a higher state of being or to ensure our survival.
Voltaire says, hold on, the extra stuff, the art, the beauty, the comfort, that is what actually makes life worth living in the first place.
Who is right when we think about the specific world we want to build?
It's an incredibly delicate tension we have to navigate.
If we define necessity purely in biological terms, just calories, hydration, and thermal shelter, then art, music, literature, poetry, and deep joy are technically superfluous.
But are they necessary for the soul?
Are they necessary to foster a flourishing, empathetic, and expansive human society?
I would argue absolutely yes. A world built purely on Cato's strict utilitarian definition of necessity would be incredibly bleak and, ironically, probably not worth surviving for.
Yes, and it reminds me of the 12 horses analogy from earlier.
Maybe we don't need 12 horses, but maybe we need slightly more than just the bare minimum of walking barefoot in the mud to thrive.
The key, I think, is critical awareness. We have to ensure that our pursuit of the beautiful superfluous, the art and the luxury, doesn't blind us to the suffering of those who still lack the basic biological necessities.
Precisely. The lens we need to adopt is one of intense intentionality.
If you engage with the superfluous, do it consciously.
Recognize it as a privilege or a joy, not as a fundamental universal right that supersedes the baseline needs of others.
Let's transition to the next thematic grouping of Proverbs because they take a much darker turn.
These quotes frame necessity not as a choice, but as an overwhelming, almost tyrannical force of nature.
Yes, we see the ancient Greek playwright Aeschylus writing in Prometheus Bound. Skill is weak before necessity.
And Menander, another Greek thinker, expands on that, saying, there are three despots: law, custom, necessity.
Then Pythagoras adds a chilling thought. Power dwells near necessity.
These ancient Greek perspectives paint a truly terrifying picture of the world.
They view necessity as a despot, a dictator.
They're saying that no matter how much skill you possess, no matter how clever your human laws are, or how deeply entrenched your customs are, when true, absolute necessity arrives at your door, like a massive famine, a catastrophic climate disaster, or a total systemic collapse, it overpowers everything. When you are pushed to the absolute brink, when your survival or the survival of your community is genuinely on the line, the normal rules, polite customs, and written laws of society just burn away.
They disappear.
Necessity becomes the ultimate dictator. It compels humans to do whatever it takes, breaking boundaries they would never cross under comfortable circumstances. Necessity isn't just a restriction. It isn't just the mundane fact that you require calories or a coat to survive the winter.
It's bigger than that.
Necessity is the driving engine of human evolution. When we lack what we need, we are forced out of our complacency. It commands us to open our minds, observe the world through a completely new lens, question the failing path we are currently taking, and innovate.
It pushes us forward.
Necessity is the uncomfortable, relentless force that pushes us to reach new horizons and ensure the salvation of our species.
It is the ultimate undefeated ruler.
It is a profoundly humbling reminder of our inherent vulnerability as a species.
We build these massively complex, seemingly invincible modern societies, and we start to believe we are the masters of the universe.
But these proverbs remind us that necessity can strip that illusion of control away in a terrifying instant.
But the final group of proverbs in our source material offers a totally different, much more optimistic angle on that exact same crushing force.
Instead of viewing necessity as a despot that simply destroys us, they view it as a catalyst.
The Roman historian Sallust observes this psychological shift. Necessity makes the timid brave.
Publius Syrus, and later St. Bernard in the medieval era, state variations of a very famous idea. Necessity knows no law.
It doesn't receive the law. It dictates it.
And of course, this culminates in the famous English proverb popularized by Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travels. Necessity is the mother of invention.
This is where the ultimate hope lies for us. When our collective backs are against the wall, when climate pressures mount, when resource scarcity threatens us, or when deep social fractures force, our hand necessity doesn't just act as a despot to crush us into dust.
It acts as a powerful catalyst.
It strips away our timidness and our complacency.
It forces us to innovate. It forces us to invent entirely new ways of living and organizing our world.
If we connect this directly back to our central mission for this deep dive, ensuring the salvation of our species, understanding this duality of necessity is everything.
If we stubbornly ignore the rising, unavoidable necessities of our time, they will eventually act as despots and destroy our carefully built systems.
But if we recognize them early, if we observe the shifting world with a critical, expanded mind, we can harness necessity as the mother of invention.
We can use the immense pressure of the moment to propel ourselves toward those new horizons.
We absolutely must harness it. The pressure is a tool if we choose to use it.
We have covered a truly massive amount of intellectual ground today.
Let's do a summary of this journey to cement these ideas. We started by looking at the grand cosmological machinery of the universe with Voltaire,
debating whether a creator makes useless things and whether our lives are filled with bloatware.
We then travel down to the hyper-specific, relatable realities of what an individual needs.
The stark difference between an English meat eater and a barefoot traveler.
And the psychological trap of the 12-horse carriage.
From there, we stripped away localized cultural dogmas and positive laws to find the bedrock of universal moral truths.
The biological necessity of keeping promises, fighting persecution, and relentlessly defending freedom of thought as a natural right.
We recognize that while the universe may permit terrible calamities and charlatans to exist alongside us, it is our duty to use our reason to build shelters.
To ruthlessly filter out the noise, and to stay grounded in the objective reality that 2 and 2 make 4.
We debated heavily whether the superfluous is a dangerous, decadent distraction or a profoundly necessary joy for the human soul.
And we saw how necessity can act as both a terrifying despot and the ultimate driving catalyst for human invention.
The challenge now, the real work, is for you to apply this new lens to your own reality.
You must audit your life. Distinguish the charlatans from the objective truths.
Recognize what is truly necessary for your path forward and identify what is merely a cultural habit or an illusion weighing you down.
As we officially wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, incredibly provocative thought pulled from the very end of our source text.
It is a medieval Latin proverb that we haven't touched on yet, but it might be the most important one of all.
It translates simply to, necessity has no holiday. The Latin is feris caret necessitas.
It is a haunting, relentless phrase.
Unlike human laws, unlike our shifting customs, our weekend breaks, or our incredibly short political cycles, true necessity does not take a day off.
Biological hunger does not rest.
The deep societal need for justice does not go on vacation.
The driving human requirement for freedom of thought cannot be paused or scheduled for a later date.
These forces are constant, they are relentless, and they are entirely unforgiving.
As you turn off this audio and step back into the chaotic reality of your daily life, as you think about the specific world you want to build and the long-term future of our species, I want you to ask yourself one final question.
Are your priorities currently aligned with the things that never, ever take a day off? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
We will see you next time.